Good afternoon, everybody. I think we're going to make a start now. It's 2:02. Welcome to this first introductory event for the Heat Network Efficiency Scheme. My name is David Hiller, and I'm the Programme Director for Gemserv. We are delighted to be the delivery partner for this scheme. We're joined today by our partners Ramboll and Turner and Townsend, and some representative from BEIS. And if I remember correctly, hopefully we've got over 300 registered individuals that are interested in this session today. The HNES is a £32 million scheme which will provide funding to existing heat networks to both improve the efficiency of networks and, importantly, outcomes for consumers. The scheme is now open. You'll find out a lot more information during the session, and it's open to applicants in England and in Wales. These include public sector organisations, so NHS trusts and universities, private sector organisations, and third sector organisations as well. Can I just take the next slide, please? Just some housekeeping. So microphones will be muted during the first half of the presentation, and webcams will be turned off as well for the first half of the presentation. But please feel free to use the Q&A function to punch in any questions, queries, points of information that you need during the session. Can I just take the next slide, please? So the presentation today, the agenda today is split into two halves. The first half is generally us providing you with information, more general in nature, and it's where the microphones and the webcams will be switched off, but you can use the Q&A function. The second half is where we have an ability to see and hear from the participants on the call, and we'll dive into a bit more detail about the application and assessment process. Delighted to be here today. So without further ado, I'll pass on to my BEIS representatives, Alex and Katie, please.
Great, thanks, David. Afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this event, which is, as David mentioned, an initial introduction to the Heat Network Efficiency Scheme, and just reflecting on the attendance as well. It's great to see the high levels of interest in this policy as we move forward. Some of you may know us already, but Katie and I lead our work on the efficiency scheme, and we'll just provide a short strategic overview of the policy context, and we'll take a quick look back at the efficiency scheme demonstrator, which we ran last year. So next slide, please. So in terms of the decarbonisation kind of context, so we know that significant progress has been made in the power and transport sectors in terms of decarbonisation, and decarbonising heat is the kind of current big challenge that we're all wrestling with. Particularly given the majority of heat, certainly in the domestic sector, is fossil fuel based. And in terms of heat networks' role in this, so we know heat networks are a mature technology. They can unlock large sources of low carbon heat that's not accessible at building scale. We can reduce our reliance on imported fossil fuels. And we know they're very cost effective in dense urban areas, including supporting or offsetting costs associated with power grid upgrades. But in order to deliver on our net zero ambitions, it's estimated that the market needs to grow from about 2 to 3% of what it's delivering currently in terms of heat demand up to 18 to 20%. And we know that delivering on that ambition will require significant investment, somewhere in the region of 60 to 80 billion, and also significant public and private sector collaboration. So that's our kind of overarching net zero context. Next slide, please. So in terms of the kind of BEIS approach, so this is just an introductory slide to our heat networks transformation programme, for those that aren't aware or perhaps already are aware. So this is our kind of programme looking forward to set the pathway to unlock the heat network potential in the UK. And it's broadly split by the kind of short to medium project delivery support alongside the kind of medium to longer term policy framework. So in terms of the project delivery side, which is the kind of stuff nearer the top there on the left-hand side, so we've got the Green Heat Network Fund, which is looking to accelerate the deployment of low carbon heat. And we're also supporting projects through the final year of the Heat Networks investment project. We're supporting performance improvements in existing heat networks through the heat network efficiency scheme, which is what we'll get into the detail of today. And we're also providing grant funding and guidance for heat network project development to local authorities and other heat network developers through the Heat Network Delivery Unit. And then on the policy side, so we are looking to introduce sector-specific heat network regulation for consumer protection, including the appointment of Ofgem as regulator. And that's obviously going to include strong focus on consumer protection rules and carbon emission limits. And we expect heat network regulation to come into force in 2024. And alongside that, we're developing a skills programme to build up skills in the sector and hopefully trickle into encouraging that additional investment and job growth. And then importantly, we're also looking to introduce heat network zoning by 2025. So that'll identify the areas where heat networks are expected to be the lowest cost solution for decarbonising heat. And a heat network zoning pilot programme is currently underway for developing the methodology for that and identifying and designating heat network zones. So in terms of the transformation programme, the efficiency scheme focuses exclusively on improving existing heat networks. And this support's needed to ensure that the issues that we have with some existing networks in terms of performance and customer outcomes don't impact negatively on market growth and all the other good work that we and yourselves are delivering elsewhere. So I'll hand over to Katie now, just to cover more specifically some issues relating to the efficiency scheme and a bit of a look back to previous work we've done. Katie.
Thank you, Alex. So hi, everybody. And so talking to you about the development of the heat network efficiency scheme and how BEIS has developed that. So we've actually been working on supporting existing networks since about 2020. And the first phase of that was the heat network optimization opportunities, or HNES for short. And that really was a proof of concept project that worked to develop the optimization studies for 21 projects, which we funded directly. That then provided the evidence base for us to move on to the Heat Network Efficiency Scheme demonstrator project, which took that support one step further by bringing in capital grants to actually make improvements to heat networks. We had 37 capital projects that took up the funding and 73 revenue funding that developed optimization studies, which totaled 5.1 million of grant support funding there. They also, at the moment, we've still got the monitoring and reporting that's ongoing for the demonstrator, and there'll be some information on that in the next slides. We also have the next step, which is HNES, which we're talking about today, which is opening shortly. And of that, we have both capital grants and the optimization studies and multiple funding rounds that are it's going across 2 financial years. So alongside this, we also have we're very much aware of the importance of policy increasing as pressures of the energy costs impact network customers and operators. So we have the HNES developed alongside published guidance, which Joe will talk to you about shortly. And we also have HNU 2, which is out for procurement at the moment, and again is BEIS procured contractors assigning sites to investigate. So next slide, please. So just to look at the HNES demonstrator, particularly the optimization studies here. So the optimization studies were developed alongside, the BEIS scope that we gave out, and that meant that they were all consistent in the information we were getting back. They were developed so that they could support operator understanding, so that they know what the issues are affecting their networks and can understand the steps to improve them. For the demonstrator, we saw particularly that local authorities and housing associations were the ones that applied for this type of support, and so less in terms of the private sector. The optimization studies are really important because they actually provide a pipeline for the HNES capital grants. So we're expecting those that had the demonstrator optimization studies to apply for HNES capital grants in the new scheme. And they also provide the evidence base. so that the optimization studies can actually be submitted as that evidence. In terms of the data in this table that we have here, you can see that the number of communal networks was 40, district networks 33, but most interestingly, we took the lowest costed work packages from each of the optimization studies, and on average, we're looking at a total work package there of 282,900 per project, and then also giving the reduced fuel savings. So in terms of gas, it was 371,100, and in terms of electricity, 23,300 kilowatt hours. So all of those total measures for those lowest costed work packages would be 18.9 million. Of course, that's actually in terms of the grant funding, we cover up to but not including 50%. So in terms of HNES funding, that would be just sort of half of that. Next slide, please. So looking now at the capital projects, so these are ones, as I've said, is part funded. BEIS do up to 50%, but not including. And this is actually the delivery and the installation of those measures to improve the heat network. The majority of these capital grants actually were given to the private sector. So as I said, opposite to the optimization studies. We had quite a wide spread of project commissioning dates, as you can see in the graph. So from April 2022 to June 2023. So the majority of those have actually completed and are now in that monitoring and reporting phase. That data is being captured and it grows monthly, but we don't have enough data yet to draw on those clear conclusions. And all this monitoring and reporting data is very important because it helps us to feed into the development of the technical standards and future regulation, but it also feeds into any opportunities to get future funding to improve heat network efficiency. So it is very important that all projects continue to provide that monitoring and reporting data. The issues that were covered by the capital projects broadly covered sort of high heat tariffs and poor water quality, and we particularly picked out things such as high pumping energy consumption, high carbon content of heat, and low heat generation efficiency. So there's quite a broad range. The work supported business cases and the justification for the HNES, and also highlighted the importance of that M&R submission. So that's all. Well, we're going to pass over now to Louise from Gemserv, who will talk you through the HNES efficiency scheme. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Louise Singleton, and I'm the HNES Programme Manager at Gemserv. And I'm going to give you an overview of HNES and what the scheme is going to entail. So next slide, please. So first of all, just a quick overview of the delivery partner. So David mentioned many of these names at the beginning, but just to let you know what roles we'll be doing in the scheme. So Gemserv is the overall scheme delivery partner. So we're responsible for the main program. We'll be managing the application process, the monitoring and reporting process, and developing all the comms and events like the one you have today. We've partnered with Ramboll again for this scheme, as we did in the demonstrator, and again they're going to be providing the assessment side of things, so from a technical perspective. And as Katie mentioned, we worked together for the demonstrator, supporting about 110 projects through to grant funding. For the HNES now, we've also introduced Turner and Townsend and Lux Nova into the delivery partner. So Turner and Townsend are going to be providing pre-application engagement and support to applicants. So in the second session, they'll talk to you a bit more about their kind of relationship manager role and how they can support projects through to application. And Lux Nova will be providing legal advice, particularly around the development of grant funding agreements and memorandums of understanding for local authorities. Next slide, please. So there are three key aims of HNES. The first one is to reduce carbon emissions by making heat networks more efficient. Obviously, as Alex said, we've obviously got net zero targets. That's a key thing, to be making sure that our heat networks are not producing more carbon than they should be. The second one is to reduce customer detriment to improve consumer confidence. Again, making sure that customers are getting a really good experience from heat networks can only help the industry to grow and to help people see the benefits of these heating technologies and really bring people along on the journey that we need to go on to hit our net zero targets. And the third aim is to, is to help prepare the heat network market for sector regulation and technical standards. So again, Ofgem have been appointed as the regulator. There is a scheme at the moment to develop technical standards. So that will be coming forward in the next couple of years as well. So we really want to make sure that where we have underperforming networks at the moment, we can feed that information into the regulators and these standards to make sure that we're setting the bar at the right level to ensure we can tackle the right areas of underperformance. Okay, next slide, please. So as Katie mentioned, there are two types of grants available. There's capital grants and the revenue grants. So on the capital side, this is part funding, so up to but not including 50% of the total project costs. And that's available for the delivery of actual measures. So taking pipes and replacing pipes, or changing controls or things like that. So actual physical changes to the heat network to make tangible improvements to the effectiveness of the heat network. And there's £30 million of funding available across the two financial years, 23-24 and 24-25. And then on the revenue side, this is fully funded and it's for the procurement of optimization studies. So to get consultants to come in and have a look at your heat network where you might not be, you've got an underperforming heat network, but you don't quite know why. You can get a technical expert to come in and have a look at your network and make recommendations on where improvements can be made. And these will be fully costed as well, so you can understand how much money you would need to spend and what the benefits would be for doing that. And the value for that is up to £2 million across the two financial years as well. It's worth noting that if you're submitting an application, you can apply within one application for funding across the two financial years, but any funding that you have been allocated within a particular financial year must be spent within that financial year. So if you do apply for funding across both financial years, anything you don't spend in the first funding financial year will not be carried over to the second financial year. You need to spend your allocated money within the financial year in which it's awarded, so or it's allocated. So that's just something to be aware of. Okay, next slide, please. So who can apply? We're looking for operators of existing district heating networks or communal heating systems. So we are not looking for consultants, for example, to be applying on behalf of their clients. It has to be the operator themselves, as they will be the ones that are signing the grant funding agreements and responsible for the funding that comes through. The heat networks must be situated in England or Wales, and we're open to any organisations from the public sector, private sector or third sector. So NHS trusts, universities, local authorities, housing associations, community groups. Yeah, it's quite a wide range of people that can apply. But again, it needs to be people that have the authority to sign off on the investment decisions. So the people that are responsible for the heat networks themselves. Okay, next slide, please. So in the demonstrator, we just had one round of funding for HNES now. Obviously, it's a longer scheme, so there are actually going to be 8 funding rounds. The first of which will open shortly, and the closing date is the 31st of March. And then the next 5 kind of follow quite regularly after that. And then we've got a gap kind of around December 2023, just cognizant of Christmas and holidays. And then the last 3 kind of follow through in February to May 2024. So those dates are all in the guidance document, so you'll be able to see those in there. And again, the slides will be shared afterwards as well, so you'll have all this information. All right, next slide, please. So I'm just going to talk you through briefly the eligibility criteria for both capital and revenue projects. So next slide, please. So in terms of what the capital grants will fund, so there are 4 categories. We've got the energy centre and the plant room, the primary secondary distribution network, the tertiary network and metering. In terms of the energy centre and plant room, we're looking at things like controls or removal or replacement of pumps, for example. Within the distribution network, we're looking at again, replacement of pipe work, replacement of HIUs. Within the tertiary network, it's looking at things that sit kind of behind the HIU, the heat interface unit. So things like system controls like TRVs. And then for the metering side of things, we're looking at things like sub-metering or sort of smart solutions to support on that. But again, as I said, there's much more detail in the guidance for applicants document. So I would recommend you all go and have a look at that if you're looking to apply, as that gives you much more detail on what is covered. If we go to the next slide, it's probably easier to say what isn't covered. So from capital grant perspective, any costs that have already been incurred prior to you being awarded any funding under HNES will not be included. Anything that's not related to the heat network infrastructure itself, so for example, improvements to building fabric won't be included. Any costs relating to engagement activities, and then specifically within the energy centre and the plant room, there won't be any costs for replacement of the primary heat generation source. The main reason for that is because the Green Heat Network Fund is there to support people to replace their existing heat source to a low carbon source. So I would recommend people go to GHNF for any of those kind of costs. Within the tertiary systems, any costs for buying or replacing heat emitters, such as radiators, won't be included. And finally, under metering, cost for metering that was required under the heat network metering billing regulations won't be included. Essentially, that's a legal requirement. So we wouldn't be funding anything that legally you have to be doing anyway, essentially. Okay, next slide, please. So from a revenue grant perspective, we'll be funding optimization studies. And there's a number of different things that need to be included in that. As Katie said, for the demonstrator, and again for this scheme, there will be a specification that's outlined that we would like everyone to align with so that we can get a consistent response across all the optimization studies, and that helps us to gather the information together and make sure everything's consistent. So we'll be looking at getting an understanding of the current performance of the network. We're looking for site visits to be able to actually capture the data, and obviously an investigation of why the heat network is performing poorly. Recommendations on what could be done to address those poorly performing areas, including costs, and then pulling that all together in a report, and then completing an optimization study outputs annex, which is included at the end of the guidance for applicants document. So if you're looking to submit an optimization study, again, have a look at that document, and right at the end there's the annex that you would need to complete. Next slide, please. So what we won't be funding is work that's already been commissioned, again, as we similarly for the capital project. So yeah, anything that's incurred before application. We won't be including any costs for project management of third-party support of the optimization studies. And thirdly, we won't be covering anything around construction, operation and maintenance of the heat network, because that would fall under essentially the construction. This is looking at existing schemes. We're not here to help build new heat networks. Again, that's for GHNF in some cases, and operation and maintenance. This is solely just to improve the network. It's not to help you actually run the network and pay for that. Okay, next slide, please. So in terms of monitoring and reporting, so Katie mentioned that that's been really important in the demonstrator. Again, it will be a condition of funding under HNES that funded projects will need to submit monitoring and reporting returns. So following feedback from the demonstrator, this has been simplified. So what we will now be requiring is on a monthly basis for projects to provide updates on how their scheme is going, any risks and issues that they see, how they're spending their budget to make sure that it will be drawn down in time. So all of that will be provided monthly. But then on a quarterly basis, now we'd ask the capital projects to provide information on progress against benefits and KPIs, covering the 3 months prior for that quarter. So still in monthly chunks, but you only have to provide it once a quarter. And it really is essential that we get this information back so that we can make sure that the projects are on track, that the money is going to be spent, but also that the aims of HNES are being met, and that we can see that the government, again, is getting value for money, for the money that's going out the door. So, so these are really important requirements and will be conditions of funding. Okay, next slide. So this is my last slide. So where can you find help and support? I've mentioned many times the guidance for applicants document. So there's a link to it there, and I think there's a link in the chat as well to for this this session. There are a couple of email addresses that would be useful to know about. So there's hnes@gemserv.com for any kind of inquiries, standard inquiries that you might have if you want to request an application form, or if you want to be added to our mailing list. If you have specific project questions, we do have a relationship manager team, so you can email hnes.support@gemserv.com if you have a particular question, or if you want to have a meeting with one of our relationship managers. So they're the two key email addresses for you to note down. And I believe that's me done. So I'm going to hand over to Joel now, who's going to talk you through the heat network videos.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, all good, Joel.
Brilliant. So after some of the previous work that we've done on this topic, the challenge of improving the performance of existing networks, both with the heat network optimization opportunities project or program, and then the HNES demonstrator, we realized fairly quickly that there were a lot of common issues and common problems, and really that we needed to do something to get this information out into the market, that there are things that could be done by individuals currently working on heat networks to significantly improve their performance, or at least identify where there are performance improvements and then go and seek help, so that we're maximizing the use of the funding that we've put in to these projects, but also that those projects will put in themselves. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So as I mentioned, yeah, it was a chance to share knowledge of common problems, also to provide content in a variety of formats so that they're slightly more accessible, and you can go back to them. So we're providing videos, we're also providing some written content, and the fact you can play them again, whereas in the context of doing your own study, you would probably just have a couple of meetings, follow-up meetings to highlight what was found in the study, and then a physical report. You might not necessarily be able to go back to them and look through them later on and really use them as a learning experience for others joining your teams. As you can imagine, it upskills the sector, and in particular, these sort of video presentations are aimed at heat network owners and operators, and some of the other documentation and other tools that we'll bring out will be aimed at a wider range of stakeholders within the sector. If I go to the next slide, please. So the video presentations, which are the ones that we're releasing imminently, along with the it will be launched with HNES main scheme, will cover the following topics. So we've got, as you might imagine, an introduction to heat networks. So just to make sure we all are on whoever's watching these are on the same page and know what's there, and then common challenges. So about, as you might expect, reducing flow temperatures, reducing return temperatures. Sorry, the first was reducing network flows, so that's dealing with sort of bypasses, water quality, a major issue. It causes a lot of problems out there. Reducing complexity and the risk that comes with, enhancing insulation, and overall improving plant room efficiency. So these are fairly common topics, as you might expect to see in an optimization study. If you go to the next slide, please. There'll also be some written documentation. The first piece will be primarily focused on how to really conduct these optimization studies, what you would expect to see in them. It's both useful for the individuals actually conducting the study and those trying to procure it, so that you have an idea as a procurer of what you should be expecting, what kind of standard of investigations you're expecting, what you might want to include in your scope, or what certain parts of a scope might mean. Case studies as well, so that you have an idea of what good looks like. And there's some other things that's in the pipeline, so I'm not promising them yet, but it'd be great to hear everyone's ideas on other shareable material. So examples are how to manage the optimization work when it's actually going on. So that's the physical works on site, and the decarbonisation options that are available and fairly common for most heat networks. So these are the sort of materials that we want to get out there, really to just upskill the sector and make best use of taxpayers' money, so that the information's out there and people can reference it rather than having to rewrite it every time they come and do one of these studies. I think that's the end of me, unless there's one more slide. No, back to the Q&A. Thanks.
Joel, just before we move on, you mentioned feedback and people getting in touch. What's the best route for them to do that? Do you mind popping maybe an email address into the chat, or providing a bit more information on that?
Sure. Specifically on this topic, I think it'd be best just to email me directly. I'll put my email address in the chat. And any more sort of general questions around either HNES or heat networks in general, specifically to HNES, use the HNES at BAYS email address, and just general heat network questions, you've got heatnetworks@bays.gov.uk, but I'll put them all in the chat.
Perfect, thanks, Joel. So I don't think I introduced myself to everybody. So I'm Samantha Shea. I work at Gemserv, so I'm going to be facilitating the Q&A today. And we've had quite a few questions come through already, which is fantastic. There were a few actually relating to sort of the role of consultants and the ability for consultants to apply for HNES. So we had one around whether the consultants had to be from a prescribed list, or can networks go out to market to find the expertise?
I'm happy to take that, or Alex, if you want to go.
Yeah, I can take that one. Thanks, Sam. So there isn't a prescribed list. Applicants will have to provide their kind of approach for procuring that third-party support to deliver that optimization study work. So no, we don't have a prescribed list.
Okay, great. So there's another question around whether consultants can apply for optimization studies, or whether the rule applies across both capital and optimization.
Yeah, thanks. So so the intention is that the applicant needs to be the person who will be the recipient of the grant funding, and we're not funding consultants directly. The applicant must procure that third-party support, but that's not to say that consultants can't support applicants in developing applications. It just needs to be the entity that will be receiving the grant funding needs to be the applicant, but where they get support from in terms of putting together the evidence for that application before submitting it to us, yeah, consultants can support as per the demonstrator.
Great, thank you. So a slightly different topic now. Would metering, where it's not required, as from a legal perspective, would that be funded?
Yeah, I'll take that one again. So yes, we did fund metering not required by the metering and billing regs in the demonstrator, and that is the case in the efficiency scheme. That'll obviously be wrapped into kind of application assessment in terms of kind of carbon savings, customer detriment, value for money, and so on. But in principle, yeah, that can be applied for as well.
Great. There was a question around HNES interacting with GHNF if the project specifically is looking to change the heat source. Would GHNF cover all of the capital costs, or would it be split across the two schemes?
Yeah, so I think the intention that the efficiency scheme is very much focusing on the kind of performance side. So what we want to be able to do is get networks that do want to change their primary heat source to a lower carbon alternative, is to make sure that they're operating efficiently and effectively in order to make that switch. So in simple terms, that might be that they're not running very high flow and return temperatures that might, for example, lead to a less efficient operation of a heat pump. So most of the kind of capital costs associated with that primary heat source, or all of those costs, should sit with a Green Heat Network Fund application. We're happy to sort of take kind of meetings or calls, I think, across the two schemes where that is the case for projects that want to, look at both performance optimization and decarbonisation. So yeah, happy to arrange that where projects feel it's necessary.
Great, thank you. Question about types of networks that are eligible. Are private purpose-built student accommodation networks eligible for capital funding?
Yes, they would be. Obviously, we've got a increasing focus in the efficiency scheme on customer detriment, and we've outlined in scheme guidance what we mean by customers in need. So those where we're particularly looking to support through our funding. So yeah, student halls, yeah, absolutely can apply, but will be assessed in that context as well.
Great, thank you. Do the revenue grants have allocated optimization study allowances?
Yes, I can take that one if you want, Alex. Yeah, so from an optimization perspective, there is a kind of a budget guidelines of between £15,000 and £24,000, including non-recoverable VAT. So yeah, if for whatever reason you wanted more than that, you would need to justify why, and that would be taken into account as part of your assessment process. But that's kind of the range that we would be looking for projects to come in at.
Fantastic, thanks, Louise. Question in regards to eligible costs. Would software and related services for continuous improvement analysis be covered by HNES?
Yeah, so I think software costs, I guess, would fall partly under the kind of metering and analysis side. So again, if they're not required under metering and billing regs, probably yes. That's probably one that will be useful to sort of talk through with our kind of support team. I think we would not fund the sort of time, sort of resource time to kind of support that, I don't think. But yeah, we can pick that one up and go through specifics via the relationship managers.
Right, we'll put the email address in the chat as well, so people can reach out to discuss those particular questions with us. Will HNES fund defect remediation? And if yes, will it come with a condition to seek recourse? Shall we, anyone want to take that one?
Max, wasn't sure if you were going to go in for that one. I guess does that mean existing defects, or is that for?
I imagine so. It's existing defects, so to address those.
Yeah, I guess essentially it would be where your if your network is poorly performing for whatever reason, potentially we would do, because obviously it would need to be addressed. So yeah, I think that would be something that we would fund, obviously depending on what the defect was and what you were looking to replace. But yeah, potentially it would do, yeah.
Joel,
Joel?
did you want to come in on that one?
Yeah, this is a really interesting and quite challenging area of support. So I think in all of these cases, we would recommend, if you are going to apply for some funding, that you provide really thorough details of the problem, what mechanisms you've used so far to try and remediate the issues through your existing contractual routes, and we'll probably have to take it on a case-by-case basis. Ultimately, I don't personally feel that it's a great use of taxpayers' money to put right something where there should be a contractual remedy to put it right if it is a defect for which you still have some form of recourse, but maybe you need some support to actually achieve that. So it's one of those areas where we could help, but I think you need to provide all of the relevant evidence, and then we can take each one case by case.
Thanks, Joel. I think there's this question's, I guess, along the same sort of lines. So if a network is not performing as designed, once works are carried out, who's responsible for this?
I guess that sounds like it's slightly after. So if you've
After
had
funding has
funding,
been awarded.
yeah. So again, I guess that would we'd be expecting that to be covered off with your contracts with your the people who are doing the work for you. If there should be sort of a period of time where if there are defects or things like that, you should be able to go back to them and get them to fix those. So I would see that as being the responsibility of the heat network owner in the contracts that they have with their service providers to be able to address those. I don't see that necessarily being the responsibility of HNES to address those.
Thanks, Louise. Next question is relation to state aid. Will the state aid cap apply to HNES funding?
Yes, it will. In simple terms. So yeah, that will be something that we'll ask about in the application form, and yeah, we will be making sure that state aid caps aren't breached.
Great, thank you. So the next one's around the sort of secondary and tertiary network. So if the secondary and tertiary network elements are owned by two different corporate entities, would an application need to sort of wrap both of those elements up in one, or could they be two separate applications?
Again, I think it would depend on the sort of almost like a case by case basis. If it's two different owners of the heat network, then potentially yes, we would want two separate applications because it would be two different organisations drawing down the funds. If it's one overall owner, then we could accept one application. So I think it comes down to who actually owns the heat network, as to who would be receiving the funds that we would be looking at the applicant to be. But I can see Joel's hands up as well. So Joel, go over to you.
I think this is another one as well that might be interesting as the applications come through. I mean, I'm quite grateful that I'm not the one sifting through the applications. Would an applicant be able to provide confirmation that they have permission to work on the other party's assets? So to avoid the complications of trying to get multiple organisations to agree to both deliver the work and then potentially having to contract out different pieces individually, which may potentially block a project from happening. If part of the network owner has it's planning to do the works and just has permission from everyone to do it, would that be sufficient for us?
Hi, sorry, jumping in here. Thanks, Joel. Yeah, so I think where we have kind of multiple relationships, it would likely come down to, yeah, I think as Joel said, that the kind of permissions to do that work. So we know a lot of district networks, for example, have kind of separation between the primary network and some of the secondary networks that are on, taking heat from the larger one. So I think in most cases, it's likely to be sort of separate applications required. But where there are kind of arrangements between the primary and secondary, and they can be clearly documented and stated application that whoever the kind of primary applicant is, and that's going to help the project go ahead and those benefits to be achieved, then we could take applications like that as well.
Great, thanks, Alex. I think that's one for the individual that asked that question to reach out, and we can discuss it with them in a little bit more detail. Can the same organisation make revenue applications for multiple optimization studies?
Yes. What we would say though is that we don't want to be funding essentially the same optimization study 10 times across very similar heat networks, very similar problems. We want to see that any learnings that have been gained from an optimization study can be shared either within an organization across multiple heat networks that they might operate, or even within the wider heat network industry. So that would be something that we would be assessing as part of our assessment process, and we would not look to fund the same studies multiple times, essentially. So if they were significantly different in terms of the heat network setup, then we would consider funding multiple revenue studies from the same organisation, but there would need to be significant differences between the studies.
Great, thanks, Louise. I think we've got time. We're just going to take one
Sorry,
more
Joel,
question.
did you just want to jump in on that one? I just saw your hand
Sorry,
up.
Joel.
Yeah, sorry, because this is something that people have asked me individually as well. Can I just check, would we be happy to receive a single sort of strategic application for a larger amount of money than is one optimization study, but it would cover multiple sites and then makes a strategic case? So one of the bits of advice I've been given is to think about the application as you would do for a pitch internally within your company. Like how would you maximize the benefit of procuring some consultants to go and do this work? And you wouldn't be procuring 10 individual sets of consultants to do 10 individual studies. You'd probably procure it as a batch and try and do some shared learnings, do some kind of high level assessment of most of the networks, and there was some deep dives into a few strategic problems. Would we be open to receiving applications along those lines? Because to me that seems like it can achieve strategic aims. It saves us having to deal with multiple applications from the same applicant.
Yeah, and I think that kind of goes back to what I said before about that sort of budget range for revenue studies. But if for whatever reason someone wanted to request additional funding, we would need justification as to why that additional funding was being requested, and maybe that is an example of where that additional funding might be justified. So yeah, that would be looked at in that sense.
Great, thank you both. Yeah, I'm just going to take one more question, and then we're going to have a short break. Can an applicant include contingency within their application?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So yeah, we kind of understand and appreciate the sort of sometimes sort of challenging environment that projects are being delivered in, particularly from a kind of rising cost perspective. So we will be putting some guidance out to applicants on approaches to contingency and things like indexation. We will allow some kind of legitimate kind of allowance for contingency and indexation and stuff like that at application. And yeah, that'll be assessed as part of the kind of costs and delivery part of the application assessment.
Great, thanks, Alex. I appreciate that there's still quite a few questions within the chat that we haven't got round to just yet, but we will be taking all of these questions away and providing written responses to them where it's appropriate to do so. If anybody would like to send any specific questions that are very specific to the projects that you're looking at, then please do feel free to email those through to us as well. We're going to take a 10-minute break now, and then we will rejoin for the application seminar. So our application seminar today will be predominantly focused on applications that are likely to come through in the first couple of funding rounds. So if you're looking further ahead, or you've joined the session today for information purposes only, this might be a little bit more detail than you'd necessarily need, but do feel free to stay with us. We'll join back in 10 minutes, so around 3 o'clock. Hi everyone, welcome back. I think we'll kick off with the second half of the session. You might have noticed that I have changed some of the settings on the Teams meeting, which allows you to unmute your microphone if you have a question, because I expect there might be a few. There's still quite a lot of people on the call, so I'm going to see how it goes. And if we end up struggling a bit for time, we might have to stop taking questions and just progress through the presentation. Suki, if you could move on to the first slide, please.
Hello everyone, good afternoon. I'm Georgia Coquinou from Ramboll, and I'm got the pleasure to be the application assessment lead for HNES main scheme. Next slide, please. So I will take you through the application form for HNES main scheme. The form has been developed so that it aligns to the HNES aims and objectives, which you have seen before. And the main objectives were other. Objective number 1, reduce carbon emissions by making heat networks more efficient. Objective number 2, reduce customer detriment to improve consumer confidence. Objective number 3, help prepare the heat network market for sector regulation and standardization. Next slide, please. So that's HNES application form, Excel-based. We have slightly different forms for capital and revenue projects. And in total, there are 6 tabs you will need to complete. As an additional functionality, this time we have added what we call application status tab, which basically enables you to check the completion status of your application as you go along filling in your inputs. Next slide, please. So I will offer you an overview of the different application form tabs and what exactly we're looking for as your inputs. So tab number tab A, applicant info. It's basically we're asking inputs on applicant organization information and parent company if relevant, and your main contacts relating to the application. Tab B, project information. We're asking for a description of your network, including address and some key network characteristics. For example, how many dwellings the network will supply or is supplying. Is it an operating network? Is it a communal or district network? And as part of that, we're also asking if there are any dwellings that fall under the HNES definition of customers in need. We're also asking for some regulatory inputs. For example, if you are heat trust registered, your number, or if you are like registered to the heat networks metering and billing regulations, or you have some identification under it. And the tab number tab C, project narrative, that is where we're asking mostly for free text as inputs. So we're asking for overview of project and funding requests, basically an executive summary of your application, why you're asking funding, what are your expected benefits, so what is the measures covered in the funding application. Then we're also asking for an overview of network data availability, quality, and metering. For example, if you have an accessible network data, you can provide any metering across the network, also identify any significant gaps, because we understand that not all existing networks are well metered. Then, very important, the next 2, it's the overviews of the rationale for the funding application to HNES in relation to objectives 1, which is reducing carbon emissions to discussed, and 2, which is related to the customer detriment. So in this episode, basically, we want to see how funded works will contribute to meeting those 2 objectives. And we have specific requirements, especially for the capital applications. Then we're asking also your approach to disseminating information. For example, any communication methods you have and means for the existing customers you supply. And also we're asking you to indicate the suboptimal areas where suboptimal outcomes are experienced within your network. Next slide, please.
Georgia, we've actually just had a hand go up.
Okay,
Are you okay to take a question just on that previous slide?
Yeah, sorry.
Matthew, if you're able to unmute. Oh no, looks like the hand's gone down.
Okay.
Carry on.
We'll have some time in the end as well, so please feel free to post the question. So the last 3 tabs, tab D, baseline and target. So for this one, we required mainly numeric values, and we have included this time the units of and the type of values were required. And it's more to help us build your baseline and what is the targeted benefits that you can provide given the works, the funded works. So we're looking at things like network reported fuel, network energy generation, heat demand and losses, and some economic indicators, for example, that has to do with cost in network operator natural gas purchase or biofuel purchase dependent on the fuel. And also we're asking some information on current network outages and service interruptions. So that's also an area, a very important area that indicates customer detriment. Tab B, funding and procurement, looks at your total application budget and funding request. Again, for capital applications, this form is slightly different, and it's broken down to different network areas that works can be applied for, as covered by Louise, or what type of networks are eligible before. And then we're asking you some questions on your procurement, for example, description and procurement milestones. And finally, tab F is all about confirmations. So your supporting evidence is to ensure that you have included them, and your declaration on the application and any supporting evidence that are correct to the best of your knowledge. Next slide, please. So for supporting the evidence, again, slightly different between capital and revenue grants as expected. So for capital grants, we need evidence of application costs. It's the same for revenue. We need also evidence of targeted benefits to the point of possible. And then for both capital and revenue, we need a signed letter or letters confirming your support, match funding, if relevant for revenue, because obviously we're providing almost all funding, and acceptance of monitoring and reporting requirements, and confirmation where relevant of any other subsidies relevant to the project. Finally, for revenue grants, we only require an outline project program because we understand it's the optimization study. While in capital, we do require a summary program of works, as well as, where applicable, confirmation evidence of eligibility of metering costs relative to heat networks monitoring billing requirements. Next slide, please. So all these are covered in great detail in the HNES guidance for applicants, which we have said about before. Also, we have included quite detailed descriptions in the forms this time under each of the tabs. So the guidance for applicants covers application process, eligibility criteria, how applications will be scored and assessed, including evidence supporting documentation required, as well as the monitoring and reporting obligations for successful applicants. And if you need the latest version of the form, please email in the HNES mail, as you can see there, the screen. Next slide, please. Now I will pass you over to Sam. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Georgia. So just going to run through a bit about the application process now. So I'm the Application Support and Relationship Manager here at Gemserv. So if I can have the next slide, please, Suki. Thank you. So prior to submitting an application, what we'd like is for all applicants to request obviously an application form from us. So there are a number of people who've already requested it and we've sent it out to them already. So if anyone would like an application form, they are available now. If you can email into hnes@gemserv.com to request it, we will reply with the application form. And if you can indicate at that point if you'd like the revenue or capital or both application forms as well, that would be beneficial. And then once the scheme opens, we, as we've said earlier, have relationship managers who are able to provide additional support throughout your application. So if you would like to have a relationship manager, if you're able to email that email address, which was put in the chat earlier, the hnes.support@gemserv.com, with details of your project, we can then set up a relationship manager for you, well, to reach out to provide that additional information. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. So something that we've touched upon earlier in the question and answers section is about multiple projects. I know we had a bit of a discussion earlier, but just as a quick recap, so the text is from the guidance that's in front. We do not intend to fund the multiple projects if they are similar. And as Louise mentioned earlier, if they have differences in them, then we could look at funding more than one from each company. But if they are similar and likely to have the same results, then we do not intend to fund the multiple projects. And as part of that, applicants should consider how the learning can be spread across multiple different heat networks that have similar similar setups. I saw a hand go up. Shall I just take that question before we move on to the next slide?
That was me. Yeah, it's just around this point on optimization studies. So obviously for capital funding, an optimization study would be required prior to the capital funding, or some variation of it, I guess. So can a sort of optimization study that's been done for a particular scheme be then kind of repurposed for a similar scheme when we apply for capital funding for that scheme, or would they all need their own separate optimization study, if that makes sense?
They would need backing of optimization studies. I can see that Alex has jumped in as well. I don't know if you've got anything further to add about how they can sort of be repurposed across multiple schemes, Alex.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Hi, Chris. Thanks for the question. So I think the context that we're working in here is that obviously, while we have secured, a pretty good uplift in terms of our capital budget, we're conscious that, even at the kind of budget ranges that we've got, we're only going to be able to fund a certain number of optimization studies. So from our perspective, it's making sure that we are, not funding sort of same study for the same applicant multiple times, and that we're able to sort of penetrate to sort of wider market, if you like. So I think in terms of your particular question around the optimization study as a sort of an evidence base, in our guidance, we have sort of stated optimization study or equivalent. So it doesn't have to be an optimization study or a report on a project that we funded in our previous schemes. What we're more interested in is the kind of work and the level of evidence that's gone into previous work. So if you as consultants, Chris, have been working with a number of your clients, and you've got sort of similar kind of types of projects, yeah, absolutely, you can use those as the evidence base. I'd suggest looking in our guidance document at the back end. I think Louise mentioned earlier the annex, which is our draft efficiency scheme scope of work for optimization studies. So that's probably a good reference point, checking something else that you've done. And it may be that there's a sort of a small amount of work that's required to bring it up to date, either in terms of kind of costings or kind of little discrete bits of work that would then sort of bring it up to that level. But obviously, yeah, if you're unsure, please reach out to the Gemserv team on kind of project specifics. But hopefully that covers your question.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Chris. Can I have the next slide, please? So moving on to sort of submitting the application once you're ready to submit. If you can email us and request a SharePoint space to be set up as early as possible. All applications we would be receiving via these SharePoint spaces, so we are not planning to take any via email like in a demonstrator. They'll all be uploaded into SharePoint spaces so that then can be submitted securely to us. So if you can email hnes@gemserv.com as early as sort of possible, and at least a week before the funding round closes, ideally, this allows time for us to set up the space and to provide you a link, and for you to check that you can get in, so there's no issues when you're uploading. To set that up, we just need some sort of basic information, so a project name, the organisation name, a primary contact name and email address, as well as the funding round that you're applying in, and then any additional users that you'd like to have access to that space. Sorry, I forgot what I was going to say. Yeah, so it's 1 space per project. So if you, for whatever reason, have more than 1 project that you're submitting for, you'll need more than 1 SharePoint space to upload to. So if I can have the next slide, please. Yes, so as I've said, you'll need to make sure that each project has its own space. You can't upload multiple projects into 1 space. And what's really important is once you have uploaded your application and all the supporting document and everything's finished, is to email us to say it's uploaded and ready to be assessed. Without notifying us, we will not be assessing the project. There's going to be lots of projects submitting, and we just need to make sure that the ones that are uploaded are fully uploaded before we start the assessment. And once you've notified us, we'll put the space into a locked read-only state, so that all the documents remain the same throughout the assessment. There will be clarifications that come out, but we'll keep the space and the main application locked so that we've got the original application. However, if you have any issues, as I've said there, it's best to email us as soon as possible, and we can look into it and try and resolve any issues ahead of any deadlines before the funding deadline. So just a few things that come up as sort of frequently asked questions or issues with SharePoint is if your organisation doesn't use Microsoft, the first time you log in, you'll be asked to create a password to then regain access every time you go in afterwards. So just a reminder to set this to something that you can remember, because it will be required every time you go in. If your account is already a Microsoft one, you won't be asked to do that step. And then we've got in the guidance some pictures if people haven't used SharePoint before or aren't sure of the functionality. If you have any issues, we can send out an additional guidance on SharePoint and how to use it. We can send that to you with those images about how to upload into it, but you can drag and drop and use the upload button. And then there's another bit here about please do not copy files directly from your own organisation's SharePoint if you're using it onto our SharePoint for the assessment. We have found if that happens, it can corrupt files and they don't open properly. So what we're asking is if you have them on your SharePoint, you've done all the application processing or getting all the documents ready on your SharePoint, to download them onto your own laptop or device and then re-upload them onto the Gemserv one. That then seems to resolve any issues with files not being able to open once they're re-uploaded. So please don't copy them directly across from another SharePoint. And then, as we've said earlier, just to really highlight it, once you have uploaded the files, please make sure you email us to let us know they're uploaded. And if you have any issues, as silly as it sounds, we find that quite a few of the issues are resolved by just closing and reopening the browser. So if you can try that first and then try to upload. If you're still unable to, if you're able to contact us as early as possible, and we'll try and resolve any issues. However, we don't expect there to be many arising from it. So, as this is the slide that Louise showed earlier with all the different funding rounds. So it's just sort of a reminder of the funding rounds, when they are, and then ideally, if people can make sure that they contact us before those funding rounds to make sure that any SharePoint spaces are set up, ready and waiting for you, for that deadline, as only ones that are received in SharePoint at that deadline will be assessed. So next slide, thank you. I will pass back over to Sam and see if there's any questions that come in.
So there was one submitted, but I think we're going to pick up on some of the timelines, the assessment timelines. Are there any other questions from anybody before we move on? No, I don't see any hands raised. So I think we can move on.
Great. Back to me. Hi, everyone again. So this time, few slides just to explain a bit more the assessment process. So as an intro statement, HNES has a limited budget. So even if an applicant meets all the eligibility criteria and scores well, it is not guaranteed, unfortunately, an award of funding. HNES funding therefore will be allocated on competitive basis and in line with the strategic objectives of the HNES. Therefore, we have come with PACE and the rest of the delivery partners to have some scoring criteria that, in order to be able to assess consistently the applications and compare them. So to start with, we start with the capital application, just because there are more scoring criteria for that type of funding. So the deliverability is a category we're looking at, and we'll look at things like cost certainty, and evidence that you have provided on that, like budget quotes, for example. Delivery certainty, how certain we are you can deliver type of what you're saying you will. Then following that, we're looking into the network performance improvements. So the reduced cost to operator of delivering heat to the end customer, the resulted improved network efficiency and heat losses reduction, the reduction in unplanned outages, disruptions, potential gas and electricity savings, and also as an overall the quality of supporting information that allow us to calculate those improvements. Next slide, please. Then we will look at the project narrative, which is one of the tabs of the application form we're asking you to input in. So your rationale for funding with regards to HNES Objective 1 related to carbon emissions reduction, as well as to HNES Objective 2, which is related to improvements on customer detriment, as well as your approach to disseminating information. Then we look into value for money. So look at things like cost of carbon abated, cost of gas savings, and cost of electricity savings, and data availability and baselining. So energy meter data availability, operational data availability, baselining analysis. Next slide, please. So for revenue applications, there's less scoring criteria. So again, project narrative is very important because that will assist us in understanding how this funding will help you with regards to HNES Objective 1 and HNES Objective 2, as well as approach to disseminating information. Deliverability as well is very important. So cost certainty, delivery certainty is again scoring criteria for revenue applications. And finally, data availability baselining, as discussed before. Next slide, please. So below an overview of the assessment process and time scales for round 1. So for weeks 1 to 6, it's our application assessment period. This includes the clarification period. This is submission of assessment outcomes. So initially we'll do some checks of the information you submitted. We may come back for clarifications based on that. Then the assessment will follow, a technical assessment as we call it. And then we will submit the assessment outcomes to HNES Investment Committee. In weeks 7 and 8 will be the review of assessments by HNES Investment Committee, including any clarifications we requested and the responses we received. To enable them to lead to a decision on funding award recommendations. Week 9, with the base internal approvals of funding recommendations. Week 10 will be confirmation to non-local authority applicants if successful applications, and issue of grant funding agreements to successful applicants. And the following weeks, 10 to 14, further approval process for local authority applicants, confirmation to local authority applicants of successful and unsuccessful applications, and issue of memorandum of understanding to successful applicants. Slide, please. Clarifications, very important for us. So from an applicant's perspective, the application is completed when application form and any supporting evidence are submitted to HNES. However, during the assessment period, 6.1 to 6, clarifications may be raised, to which you must respond. So please make sure that you have someone available over this period to ensure full and timely responses to any clarifications can be provided, to enable us to have to overcome do the assessment as appropriate. Also, as an added comment, even if you're unsuccessful to this round, we'll always encourage you to reapply in the future. So you are urged to consider working to improve your project and your application and resubmit your amended application in the future round. And we will provide feedback on which areas you will need to improve to do so. I think that's all, but next slide if not. I'll pass you back to Sam.
Thank you again, Georgia. So just a quick bit on funding drawdown if you are a successful project and are awarded funding. So funding is allocated for each financial year and cannot be carried between the two. So as part of your application, you will be asked which funding round, which financial year you would like the funding to be in and the value of it. And they are done on financial years ending at the end of March. And as below, there's some dates there for when they have to be claimed by. To claim the funding from HNES, there needs to be evidence of spend before we're able to pay out. And all of this, we would be providing further details to projects if they are successful, but just so that people are aware of how the process works. And then if we can go to the next slide, thank you. There is a difference between local authorities and non-local authorities. Thank you. There's so non-local authority applicants, it's a cash drawdown for the grant, which can be made any point after the successful, or after you're successful and all the documentation has been signed. And as I was just saying, it has to be evidenced with spend, whereas local authorities, the grant can be claimed all in one go as soon as you've signed the relevant documentation, and then you're able to spend that. However, you still need to try and ensure that it's spent in the relevant timeframes. So if we can do the next slide, and again, I don't know if there's any questions or answers that have come through yet, Sam.
So no written questions, I don't think. Oh, one actually around the horizon for carbon, gas or electricity cost savings. Are those assessed on an annual or over a period of time?
So I'm happy to take that. So we assessed it. We assess the improvements based on your baseline. So your baseline versus what you can achieve when the completion of works, whenever that is, it can be over 2 years, over 3 years. So that's how we tend to assess the savings. But of course, if you can provide like a timeline that says with these works you can achieve X savings for 10 years, it's even more beneficial, and you can link it to objective 1. It's about how you reduce carbon emissions. Then that will be taken in consideration, will be scored higher as a result.
Great, thanks, Georgia. Were there any other questions for our speakers before we move on? Chris, do you want to come in?
Yeah, hi again. Yeah, no, just something I mentioned earlier, but maybe we could just so how is the funding going to be split evenly across those 8 windows? And how sort of do you expect to manage that if you get a lot of applications in the first window and so on?
Alex, did you want to take that one?
Yeah, hi again, Chris.
Hi.
So yeah, it's a good question. So we haven't necessarily well, this is very much a demand-led scheme. So we're intending for the stuff that Chris Forster is going to talk about now, the pre-application support, to sort of aid us in terms of getting a clearer understanding of what our kind of profile of projects applications will look like. So we've got a good idea, or we've got an idea of how we might see our funding deployed across financial years, but not necessarily very accurately across funding rounds. So part of the work, that Chris will be talking about now is engaging with applicants to understand when they might be making applications. So please assist them if you're engaging with them. Please assist them in any way you can with that. In terms of I guess to more directly answer your question, obviously we're keen to support as many projects as we can, really as quickly as we can, because the quicker we can do that, ideally the quicker those benefits are delivered, and those projects can, operate better and serve their customers better. So I think, we're kind of keenly awaiting to see what comes through in our funding round 1. But it's unlikely that we'll have a sort of a cap on what we feel we might be able to draw down or award in funding round 1.
Great, thanks, Alex. Any further questions before we move on? Nope. Okay, Chris, I'll hand over to you then.
Hi there all. I'm Chris Forster. I'm the pre-application support lead for Turner and Townsend, so we're excited to be new to the scheme. I've got a few slides just to touch on what the pre-application support for applicants looks like and how you can access that and kind of what we're able to provide.
Chris,
so
apologies. I've just seen Nathaniel has put his hand up.
Yep.
No
problem.
Did you have a question?
Yes, I did. Yeah, it was regarding so the funding and whether so there's obviously the 2 types which HNES do, the 100% grant funding for investigation work, and then you've got the capital funding which is up to 50%. You mentioned earlier that one organisation can't put in multiple applications for if they've got similar projects. Is that the case for both capital and investigational funding?
Yeah, hi, thanks very much for the question. So I think it probably would apply to both, obviously subject to kind of what we see coming through. But I think, our understanding and kind of thinking around this issue is primarily driven by our optimization studies that we funded in the demonstrator. So I think that's where we saw perhaps some projects from kind of multiple projects from sort of single applicants where it felt like with some kind of dissemination of the learning from a smaller quantity of projects, the applicant could still look to ways of achieving those outcomes. So I think given the kind of budget splits we have for the efficiency scheme, it's primarily an optimization study kind of issue as we see it. But yeah, happy to sort of kind of engage with yourselves on the types of capital projects. If they're kind of delivering sort of similar benefits or can deliver benefits and improve outcomes for consumers, then we'd be keen to fund those.
Right, thank you. Yeah, because obviously capital funding often involves, it's not necessarily the issues, but it needs a load of BMS engineers or it needs a lot of investment for a new metering or whatever, and that obviously just because you know about the issues doesn't necessarily mean you can find a way of funding it if you've only done one application. So yeah, no, that makes sense. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Apologies, Chris.
That's all right, no problem. So just in terms of pre-application support, any applicant for the scheme, if they so wish, can access some front-end support from the application support team. That might be to discuss your application, the process itself, or to begin kind of prepping you and your organisation for applications for submission. So the support team can provide kind of an initial contact for queries, the application form to be issued to you. We can hold one-to-one sessions with yourselves with a dedicated relationship manager to discuss your application. Once you've looked at the application form and digested the guidance, we can also provide kind of a first pass review of the application and provide you some feedback and signpost. The other thing that we'll be doing is trying to respond to applicant inquiries prior to submission, just make sure that you kind of have had all the questions answered that you might have as an organisation before you actually submit your application. The other thing that we'll be doing is really working with organisations to make sure that they're ready to submit. It might be that you don't feel that you're ready to submit within the first couple of funding windows, and we can assist you with that and tell you that you're ready to submit in terms of the evidence base that you've got for your application and kind of the narrative that forms part of the report. Next slide, please. So we have a number of relationship managers on the bottom of the screen there. So these are familiar faces for you if you choose to take up the relationship manager support that's available. I should say that not everyone who comes to the scheme will utilise a relationship manager. We're there if you need additional support, if you need additional capacity going through your application form and kind of answering your questions to support you. So if you do want a one-on-one session, please do get in touch at the HNES.support email at the bottom of the screen there, and we can arrange one-to-one sessions with you, whether that's a quick phone call or if you want to sit down and talk about the kind of the devil in the detail of your application. We can talk about your prospective project or projects. If you're looking at multiple applications, whether they be revenue or capital, we'll hopefully provide any clarifications that are needed on the application process, the eligibility, kind of the M&R requirements, and essentially what you're signing up for as part of the process. We'll also work with you to kind of assess your readiness to submit an application, to make sure that you're in the right place to make sure your application goes in the right way with the right amount of evidence. And the other thing that we'll be looking to do is try to advise you on kind of any additional project considerations, whether that's for the capital support or the revenue support there. And all of our relationship managers have kind of worked in heat networks, either in the delivery in a trade body. So we all kind of know the challenges, but also the opportunities that come with networks and kind of managing communal networks. Next slide, please. Just some more signposting, as has been detailed previous in the presentation. If you haven't already, please read the HNES guidance and come back to us with any questions that you might have. It covers everything that you really need to know to kind of form the basis of an application. But if you've got any bespoke questions, any specific project questions, please come back to us. If you want a scheme application, please email the hnes@gemserv.com email. So you'll be sent a guidance pack and a application form when that's ready. And again, if you do want some additional support, you feel like you need a little bit of capacity to help you work through your application, please contact us for a one-to-one session with the relationship manager team, and we'll help you kind of support and rationalize your application coming through. So that's the hnes.support@gemserv.com email again. And that's it from me.
Thanks, Chris. We've had a question come through from Peter, asking whether it would be an acceptable strategy to apply for an optimization study first and then apply for a capital project later down the line, say 6 months later. Louise, did you want to respond to that one?
Yep, can do. Yes, Peter, that would be an acceptable strategy. So yeah, we obviously want to help people to understand where their heat networks are poorly performing, and then obviously help them to actually realise the benefits that would be gained from the recommendations in the report. So so yeah, that's definitely something we would look to support.
Thank you, Louise. If there are no further questions, I'll just sort of summarise the slide that you can see in front of you. So we have a number of events that we're attending over the next month or so. So we're visiting the housing providers that form the heat network later this week. We're also looking to host a consultant focused event on the 21st of February. So if anyone's interested in attending that, please do look out for an invite. And we're also taking part in an event that is being hosted by Guru Systems and some other consultants that were involved in the HNES demonstrator towards the end of the month. A key date for your diary is the closing date for funding round 1, which is the end of March. Does anyone have any questions for any of our speakers today? I know we've had a few written ones. I can dig back through some of those, but feel free to raise your hand or unmute and ask a question. No, no further questions. Peter, hello.
Hi, sorry. So I posted this question earlier a few times. I was just wondering if there is any chance to see some examples of optimization studies, either from the demonstrator you had last year or anything else, or some sort of best practices, how particular types of heating networks could be improved. So in my case in particular, it's about small communal networks that provide heating to one building with a few apartments. We don't know how to manage this. We are just experiencing issues and paying huge bills, and we are not eligible for the green funding. How was it called the last year? The one that where you could replace boilers. So well, just
HNES,
any
the Green
sort of
Heat Network Fund.
advice. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, hi Peter. Thanks for your question. So the intention is, as part of the kind of guidance, published guidance and videos that my colleague Joel mentioned earlier, is that kind of work stream, and those outputs are designed to respond exactly to your question. To give you that overview of the types of measures, the types of issues, and the types of solutions for addressing kind of poorly performing networks. Those videos will be published online when we launch the scheme shortly, and then the guidance document will follow. I don't know if Joel's still online to sort of put a bit more of a date on that, Joel.
I'm still on the line. I can't put a date on the written materials yet, but there'll be plenty of time for you to use them within the context of this work. What we can also do is, if you want to drop us an email with some details about the scheme, just rough details, number of customers, types of equipment that you've got installed, whatever you know really about it, we can then have a look through our the range of reports that came back from the HNES demonstrator as well, and we might be able to find something slightly more targeted to the conditions that you've got. But the email addresses are in here. But as soon as we've got them, we'll send them out. Sorry, I can't give an exact date now, but I think I'll probably, if I try and give you one, I'll probably say the wrong one. Thank you.
Thank you both. Are there any additional questions from the audience?
There's just one that's gone in the meeting chat, which just says, will you produce an FAQ with all the Q&A, please? Yes, we will. We'll be providing answers to all the questions, and obviously some of the questions that we didn't get to answer in the first session as well. So yeah, we'll share that with everyone that's on the call.
Great. Yeah, I'm not going to go back through the questions that came through in the first half, because I know we've had a few people drop off David, I can see you've just put your hand up.
Just to say to everybody, I really enjoyed the session. It was excellent. If I can help anybody with any appraisals of large river source heat pumps as a fuel switching aspect, please get in touch. We're happy to crunch some numbers for people and share the lessons learned at both Bristol Harbour, but Queen's Quay and Clydebank. It's both have been a great success. So please just reach out if I can help anyone.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I think if there aren't any other questions, it just leaves me to thank you all for joining. It's been really fantastic to see so many people join us for this very first session. If you're not yet on our mailing list and would like to ensure that you're receiving updates from the HNES team, the email address is on screen. If you could drop us an email, we'll make sure that you're added. And please do make sure that you're following us on LinkedIn and Twitter as well, because we will be sharing updates via those social media feeds. Thank you all so much.